Well, it's good to be back with you. I hope you've had a refreshing, if somewhat arduous afternoon. You know, if you're like me after lunch, I need the riposo. But I just wanted to continue that little announcement. Our website has an incredible number of resources, acton.org. It's very simple to remember. Acton is Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And on there are academic articles, highly referenced academic articles, but also films. We have this whole project on poverty that we're doing called Poverty Cure, and we'll have there's a DVD on the entrepreneurial vocation, which may interest you. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that, and also to incentivize you so that we can put you on our mailing list, we'll give you a book called The Call of the Entrepreneur. And I think there's a little flyer in the back for you to sign, or you can go on the website and get that for free. So I talked basically, I think if you wanted to put everything I said in my earlier speech about the vocation of business, the vocation of the entrepreneur, the call of God, the very first words in the scripture I said were words of vocation, right? Where God calls man and woman to be like him, to be creative. The whole image we have of God in that first chapter of Genesis, the second chapter of Genesis, is the creator God, the God who is fashioning, literally manipulating. Manipulating means working with your hand, manipulating the world, creating it from nothing, bringing it into being. And then God says, live out your vocation. And I think that's what you do in enterprise. And I want to speak a little bit more directly about that and more concretely about it. And I can't get more concrete than the dust of the earth and the breath of life, because that's what constitutes us. You know, there's the various kinds of heresy. We call the two main distinctions of heresy material heresy and formal heresy. Material heresy is let's say, grandma who doesn't believe that Jesus ever used the toilet, right? That's material heresy. She's not renouncing the humanity of our Lord. She just can't conceive of such a thing, that it would somehow be a diminishment of the Lord. So she's in error that she would think that way, but it's not. It's material. It's a mistaken notion. And then there's formal heresy, which is the rejection of the humanity of Christ. And that we see, in the Docetists and other various heretical movements in the history of the church. I think there's a certain kind of, and I'll say in general it's a material heresy, that says that somehow business is something we do apart from our faith. As I said earlier, we decorate our business with religion. Some of them do that more than others. But to take it seriously, to Christo-finalize our work, our enterprise. By our work, I don't just mean your particular LLC. I don't mean just your particular incorporated business, but I mean your work, what you do, what you dream about, what ambitions you have, what plans you have, what things you can see that other people haven't seen yet. Those things need to be consecrated to God. And how do we consecrate those things to God? We don't just sit down and say, Lord, I consecrate these things to you. I hope we do that. But I think we have to do it in a more holistic way. So to look at this, I just want to draw an analogy to the sacraments of the church. Now remember that the sacraments that emerge from Catholic theology, and this is also true in Protestant theology to some extent. I think Catholics put a bit of a more detailed point on it, which Catholics tend to do about everything anyway. Somebody called Catholicism the religion of stuff, right? And we've got bells and water and incense and vestments and all of this. We're the religion of stuff. But we're the religion of stuff because we're rooted in our Judeo-Christian heritage, right? In the book of Genesis, we see the creation of the world. We understand the world to be good. And then the whole nation of Israel is a very earthy experience with God. And then we come to the incarnation of Christ. Think about that for a moment. How intimate God gets with us. the incarnation, the enfleshment. This means that the eternal, ethereal God who exists beyond time and space condescends to live in the context of scarcity, in the context of limitation. He is born at a particular time in a particular place of a particular woman in a particular culture. And he reveals his redemption not from outside of the world, but from within the world. I don't know if many of you remember the movie, the name's just gone out of my head, E.T. You remember E.T.? This is quite a while ago now, isn't it? E.T. was this cute, cuddly little alien from another planet who looked, by the way, for all the world like Mother Teresa, you know. She was cute and cuddly and wrinkled, and she, oh my Lord, I hope she didn't take offense at that. I am in real, real trouble. I said it with all respect and affection. But there was this craze about the time of E.T. that E.T. represented Jesus. E.T. even had the Sacred Heart. And I said at the time, that's heresy. They said, why? I said, because E.T. came from outside of our world. He wasn't of our world. Jesus brings his redemption not from outside of the world, but he breaks it out through the world. His humanity mingled with the humanity of the Virgin Mary. That's how, because the incarnation is the reiteration of God's original intention in the creation, that God wanted to be one with his people. And so he comes back to the world through the incarnation, through humanity. Now that has incredible ramifications for what Christianity means in this world. The world, as I said, in a sense, is sacramental. I was quoting Jared Manley Hopkins earlier. It's sacramental. When you touch the world, you touch God in some way, the face of God. Because the world isn't just created by a watchmaker that's left on its own. The world is sustained by God. You remember the old Baltimore Catechism, who is God? God made me, love me, to serve him in this world. He is the creator and he sustains the world. He keeps the world in existence. That's the passage I was looking for. He keeps the world in existence. So when we touch anything in the material world, we have this opportunity to encounter God. And what results in the church's meditation and experience of this reality is that the sacraments reveal and communicate grace. What is a sacrament? A sacrament is an outward sign of an inward grace, right? Instituted by Christ. So in the sacrament of baptism, what's the outward sign? It's water. The inward grace is the cleansing from original sin. How about this one? In the sacrament of matrimony, what is the outward sign? What is the physical sign of matrimony? Some people say the ring. Other people say the unity candle. The unity candle is an invention by Protestant florists in search of liturgy. I hope there's some Protestants here laughing with us. I was not laughing at you. But the outward sign of marriage, the material of the sacrament of marriage, what we call in theology the matter of the sacrament of marriage, is sex, the conjugal union. Here Scott Hahn is here somewhere, and I remember once him saying, sex isn't good. Sex isn't great. He sounded like Tony the Tiger. He said, sex is holy. Because in the matter of the sacrament, that is in the lovemaking, the conjugal union of man and woman open to life in a permanent, committed relationship that is exclusive, it's like the couple is receiving Holy Communion. Or for that matter, Holy Communion. Think about Holy Communion. Isn't it interesting that our Lord, in giving us the gift of himself in the Eucharist, gives it to us under the mode, under the sign of bread and wine not grapes and grain. Bread and wine. What's the difference between bread and wine and grapes and grain? Benedictus Dominus Deus universi quia de tua lagitate accepimus panem. We offer to you bread, the work of our hands, and wine, the fruit of the cup. Bread and wine has undergone human transformation. It's undergone work, human labor. So we offer to God something that we make, and he gives us back something we could never make. So the matter of the Eucharist is human labor. There's even a phrase in Latin, it refers to it as the commercio. Now, to our modern ears, we think of commerce, and that really is, because commercio is the exchange. This exchange between the giving of the thing that we present in the offertory and the giving of what God gives us in the consecration. So our work becomes the stuff of the sacramentality of your vocation. Now, I don't say that it's the same as marriage. I don't say that it's the same as it's more like, look upon it as rosaries and miraculous medals and like sacramentals. Sacramentals point us back to the sacrament, the source and sun of our life. And we need to look at our workplace as sacramental, as the matter by which we experience the reality of God. And where does this begin? Well, I'm not going to put this in an order of priority in the sense that this one first and this one second. But here are several elements to keep in mind as we're thinking about the sacramentality of business. One of the first things, and this goes to what is at the heart of Catholic social teaching, it is really the foundation upon which all of Catholic social teaching rests, and that is simply the human person. That what our work is work for other people, and that what we produce is produced for other people, and it is work with other people. It is the extension of our nature as social beings. Human beings are simultaneously individual and social. We're unique, which means we're individual. We are so from the moment of our conception. We have a different DNA structure than our mothers, and yet we live within the mother. And the whole future of our lives is an interplay between this individuality and social reality of who we are. And in business, we are expressing that too, especially in creative business, where you come up with an idea nobody else has had. But you're doing it with other people. I've learned over the years, especially these years of my priesthood and the years of my working with the Acton Institute, I used to, if you had asked me 25 years ago about leadership, I would have said, well, it takes a strong personality who, gets people together and does it. My view is a lot different. It's knowing how to work with people, knowing where the talents are and how to uncover the talents and to help people discover their own talents. That's really what leadership consists of in business or in the church. It's not just telling people what to do. It's animating people to do what they know best how to do. Adam Smith would call it the division of labor. But in the theology of the church, we call it the social reality of who human beings are. And so when we talk about the human person, I think it's worth thinking for a moment how we differ. So let's say, efficiencies in business, productivity in business, anticipating markets in business, having this division of labor, as I mentioned, various modes of production and things like that. What makes Christian business, what makes a consecrated business different than a secular business who can enjoy all of these efficiencies, all of this productivity, all of this insight into technique? The difference is anthropology. The difference is how we come at the question of who we're working with. And I found this incredible quotation from C.S. Lewis a number of years ago that is so beautiful. You know, Lewis is so poetic in the way he puts something that it sticks in your head. Lewis says, "You have never met a mere mortal. Everyone whom you have ever come in contact with, everyone you have ever purchased something from, everyone you have ever had a fight with or who have loved, every shop girl is either an everlasting splendor or an immortal horror, but you have never met a mere mortal." And then he goes on to say something else. He says, this is C.S. Lewis writing, "Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, my neighbor is the most sacred thing to present itself to my senses." Think about that. When you are working with someone, this is very hard, and it'll fade by this afternoon, and you're getting out of the parking lot. You're not going to be thinking that driving that car that just cut you off is the monstrance, right? That's not what's going to happen. But it's good to keep this in mind and bring it into your prayer periodically, because hopefully little by little we begin to kind of, we have a managerial issue that we have to deal with. We're hiring somebody, we're firing somebody, which, by the way, is allowed in Catholic teaching. Sometimes it's even obligatory for the good of that person and the good of the work itself. I know some Catholic parishes don't believe that. They've had the secretary for years and years and years, and the technology has gone by, but she's going to stay there. We'll hire 5 other people to support her, but we won't let her go. Or the organist, okay, I'm getting too touchy now, I know. But if you're viewing this person as though they were the most sacred thing to present itself to your senses, then there's a way in which you act that is just and respectful and mature and loving and truthful, because we all owe the truth to one another. So the first thing is how we treat each other. That includes our competition too. I don't think that I don't think competition is such a bad thing. I know people are always saying, Christians wouldn't compete. I forget who it is. There are 2 of these saints. It's either Cyril and Methodius, or who are those other 2 that always go together? Gregory and... Anyway, but there's a wonderful thing in the breviary. It talks about how they would compete with each other for holiness, and how they just spurred each other on to be better disciples of Christ. I think in Enterprise we can have that attitude toward, if you love the truth, that what is competition? Competition is the planning of things in society over the whole of society, rather than centrally planned. So I'm planning tires and how to make tires, and Michelin is planning tires and how to make tires. And we find different ways of doing it, and we say, that radial idea is a great idea I hadn't thought of. And it is improving the market, which is improving service. Now, the trick is to keep this anthropology. You have to keep all of this stuff together at the same time in the same place. Now, what makes possible for a greater awareness of this? I think regular examination of our conscience. I mean, every day, a little examination of conscience. We're in the middle of the day or at the end of the day, we ask ourselves 2 simple questions. What have I done today that I should not have done? And what have I left undone that I ought to have done? And just sit with that for a minute and let it all kind of come up. You do that every day, and you add to that going to some form of accountability for our Protestant brothers and sisters. It may be a Bible study or a group of colleagues that you're being accountable to. For Catholics, it would most normally be going to confession, where you're going and you're accountable. And you have done that every day, examining your conscience, and you go to confession every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or every month. It's going to enrich your capacity in confession, rather than, bless me, Father, for I have sinned, my wife is blah, 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 blah. When people start off their confession like that, I let them go for a few moments and then I say, okay, but I can't absolve your wife from here. I can absolve you. Would you like to tell me your sins instead of hers? So it's not just the accountability, but it's also the becoming aware that we're not God, that we do make mistakes. And we do it in a secure place where the people we're talking to or the person we're talking to is very trustworthy. And it enriches our awareness. What is humility? Humility is the love of the truth. People who are full of themselves are precisely not full enough of themselves. They have to create illusions. To be full of yourself, I know the negative meaning of that, but to really be a person who's fully alive, is to be a person who has acknowledged the truth of who you are, which means the truth of your talents, but also the truth of your weaknesses. So this very simple discipline of the spiritual life, examination of conscience and some form of confession, becomes the stuff that enables you to create a business that can be Christofinalized. Because now you're not so defensive that if anybody makes a critique, the secret to not being defensive is to know your faults better than anybody else does. And you may as well, because we all know it about you, so you may as well know it better than anybody else does. And then here's a very practical thing for you to think about. I think the day of day planners, the time of day planners has passed us. Now it's iPhones and Outlooks. So I don't know, I used to describe this when we all had our Franklin Cubbies or just our paper day planners. Maybe now what you need to do is open your iPhone. But what I'm suggesting here is that you pray with your calendar in front of you. That's the stuff of your life. That's the doctor's appointments, that's the kids' football schedule, that's your wife's birthday, that's your investment portfolio meeting, that's your colonoscopy, that's your, all of the stuff of your life is there on your calendar. What better template to use? I don't say for I'm not recommending that you replace the rosary with your day timer, your iPhone, but I am saying that some awareness of what your day and week consists of on a very concrete level, you can bring this before God in your meditation, because then you're consecrating everything that you are to God, not just your business, not just your religious obligations, not just the food, but the whole of it is being brought into your prayer, and you're doing this on a regular basis. You're beginning to transform you and your work. Historically, it's very frustrating to me when I hear religious leaders or just kind of dabble into or hear people dabbling into the notion that somehow Christianity is opposed to business. Because if you look at Christianity historically, it has always been a builder of institutions. Think about this, and I believe this is rooted in the belief in the incarnation and in the sacramentality of the church, that Christ does not just come to redeem us by his word. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And if it all just stayed up there, it would be kind of like God saving us by juridical fiat. But it doesn't stay up there. You go down a few more verses in the prologue of John's Gospel, and it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And I think this is so a part of Christianity's DNA, that what the church just did was build institutions. And you see it in a nascent form in the books of the New Testament, particularly the Acts of the Apostles, where you're seeing them putting the church together. It's where the deacons begin to come forward, and there's a need for that, and they create this order. And then there's the order of widows and virgins, and all of this begins, and missionary efforts that are organized, and fundraising efforts. You've got, I think, 2 long fundraising letters of St. Paul, when they have some fundraising to do for the church in Jerusalem, and he writes this whole thing about, I'm going to ask you to be generous givers. I don't want you to give begrudgingly. I want you to give with a joyful spirit. I always tell my people, but I would settle for a big check even if it's begrudging, Paul didn't say that, I said that. But you see the church building, and historically, when you look at the history of the church, have you thought of it this way? It's both this incarnational dimension of the church, this sense of the incarnation, and her Catholicity. That is to say that the church is evangelical. The church, from her beginning, is missionary. It's not an option. That's not one part of what you could do if you want to be a Christian. It's what you do as a Christian, is being evangelical, being those who tell forth the gospel, those who witness to others of the saving relationship with Jesus Christ that he offers the world. That's what we are. So it's this Catholicity, this universal evangelical mission, and its incarnational or institutional building mission. And these 2 realities in the church begin in society in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century to build institutions, not just congregations, not just mission organizations, not just monasteries, but we begin by building the first hospitals where people could bring the sick to monasteries initially, just some extra rooms people would put them in. Now we have the monasteries, we have the convents, this is an institution, but then people bring the sick and they're put in these rooms, and you say, well, now let's clean this person up. And so all of a sudden, we begin developing sanitation habits and systems. And then the person's coughing and you can see they're having trouble breathing, and you think, gee, we have this nice digestivo, let's say, grappa or sambuca that we drink. These were the early drinks in the monastery. They were really medicinal things. They were kind of sweetened because some of them were so bitter, but they contained alcohol, they contained herbs. And you think to yourself, gee, when my nose is stuffy and I smell that, it kind of clears it up. Maybe this will help this person. And you begin building a nascent system of medicine. This is what happened. And then you build institutions. The church built the first institutions. And the church's love of human vulnerability, of people who are vulnerable, caused her to minister to them not because they were Christian, but because we are Christian. And to go into circumstances that were very risky for them, such as Christians who would minister to people where the plague was, where the doctors and the politicians and the army, the military would have left. Christians were there, even if it was only to help someone die, to be with them and accompany them in their death. So the institution of the hospital. I could go through the same kind of analogy with the institution of the university. She builds institutions. Why do we build universities? Systematic learning is important because the truth can be apprehended. Because there's a God who has ordered the universe. The universe is rational in our understanding. Therefore, we can discover truths about the world which points us to the truth of the world. And then missionary organizations that went out, and armies of men and women who went to serve others in need. And business. Business enabled the church to accomplish a lot of her mission work. Finding new routes for trade. Who would be on those boats? Not just the merchants. The Franciscans, the missionaries, would go with them. And they'd preach the gospel And they did it in the way that you did it in those days, which wasn't always slick and neat and nice. But that's what was happening. The gospel was being carried by globalization. And it's happening today in China. I can't tell you how many people in China who are teaching English, who are really Christians there, to bring the gospel. And that's why there's an underground revival of both Catholicism and evangelical Protestantism going on in China. And it's a marvelous thing, and it's being carried by business in many different ways. I don't want to get anybody upset or worried, but we're living in this insane world right now. Have you noticed? The denial of reality all around us. I mean, of reality. I think the cherry on the top of the cake was the woman in, where was she, Spokane, Washington, who was the head of the NAACP and was found not to be African American. And she said, but I am. Her mother said, well, that's news to me and her father. But she could deny the reality of her genetics. Now, run a few other scenarios, will you? And see the other kinds of denials of reality that are going on in our society. So we are at a moment that is very critical. I say that because you are the leaven, you are the legates, you are the ambassadors, you are the first line of the church's message of sanity to a world that has gone insane, of healing to a world that is sick. And in order to accomplish it, we need to accomplish it with great precision and great talent. Etienne Gilson, who was a Thomist philosopher, wrote some very memorable lines. He said, if you want to build a cathedral with a facade like that of Notre Dame that represents the rising of the soul to God, if you want to do that, you must first understand geometry. And then he said something that encapsulates what he was talking about there. Piety is never a substitute for technique. For without technique, piety is helpless to make use of nature for the glory of God. That's your mission. Understand technique. Be talented. Be good at what you do. I think it was Dorothy Sayers said once, no wobbly tables ever came out of that carpentry shop in Nazareth. Right? Be good at what you do, because the search for excellence is an inchoate way of discovering God and of helping others to discover Him. One final image to leave with you, because this is what we're about. When I was living in a house in Michigan once, there was a tree out front. Remember, I'm from Brooklyn, so trees, there was a tree once in Brooklyn, but they got it. But there's this tree out front, and I'm looking at it, and it went up above the 3 stories of the house. And as I looked at the top of the tree, I noticed there were green leaves that had blossomed in the spring. But as you came down, and on the other side, there were all these dead leaves, and the bark looked strange, and yet part of it looked healthy. And then I discovered the existence of something I'd never heard before, a tree doctor. So we called the tree doctor in, and he came in and began to pick at the bark and pick up the leaves that had died and dig around. And he came to me and he said, you got to cut it down, the tree is dead. I said, come on, how can the tree be dead? It's blossoming. It's just sick. He says, no, it's dead. You got to take it down, because if you don't, some winter it's going to just blow over onto the house because it's weak. I said, well, how do you explain those leaves? He said, the sap is still in the tree and pushing it forward. But each year there's less and less sap because the roots are dead. And I think of that as an analogy of our culture. If we don't tend to the roots of what made civilization, Western civilization, great, which has to do with this anthropology that I've spoken about, the right to private property, the importance of prayer, the transcendent meaning of human life, the dignity of human life, all of these things I've talked to you about for 2 hours. If we don't go back to our roots, we're going to just be living on a past legacy, and that past legacy will not be able to replenish itself and sustain itself. The thing I'm hopeful about and joyful about is that I believe in the end, the culture of life always must triumph over the culture of death, because the culture of life is to replenish itself, and the culture of death can only immolate itself. My friends, be legates, be ambassadors for the culture of life in your work. God bless you.